Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2020 AFC Summit webinar series, proudly hosted by Nonotuck Resource Associates and the statewide AFC Roundtables. The AFC Roundtables meet regionally and virtually to continue the mission of the AFC Summit to learn, share, and continue the dialogue between AFC organizations. This webinar series is an adaptation of the AFC Summit event typically held annually at Holy Cross College. We thank each of you for staying connected virtually with us, and we ask that you stay tuned for future webinar opportunities. You will have two moderators for today, myself, Deb Schneer, and Carrie Parody, who will assist with Q&A. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you may enter a private chat to Carrie Parody or myself, and we'll try to troubleshoot those issues with you. A few other brief instructions for participants. This webinar is offering CEU contact hours. We ask that each participant sign into the chat feature. Following today's webinar, you'll receive an email with an evaluation. We ask that you return those evaluations per the instruction in that email, and you'll receive a certificate of contact hours. We ask that all participants remain muted throughout the webinar. Your presenter will open up for Q&A periodically throughout the presentation. You may ask questions through the chat feature or also use the hand raise feature found on the participant icon. If you hover at the bottom of your screen, you can raise your hand and a moderator will unmute you and call on you to participate. Today's webinar is encouraging engagement from attendees, so please do use that hand raising feature or chat. And again, you'll be called on and unmuted by a moderator. We'd like to introduce today's presenters, Kelly Clark, clinician with Nonotuck Resource Associates, and Grayson Fleischner, Assistant Director of Quality Enhancement and Sexuality Trainer for Nonotuck Resource Associates.
Thanks so much, Deb. Welcome, everybody. We're very excited to be here as part of the AFC Summit. I think it's pretty cool that we're able to reach even more people than we would doing this in person. So I hope everyone's out there staying safe and well. As Deb said, my name is Grayson Fleischner. I work in the Quality Enhancement Department at Nonotuck, also in the Human Rights. I'm a Human Rights Coordinator and Sexuality Trainer. I'm going to hand it over to Kelly to introduce herself, and then we can go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Gray. Hi, I'm Kelly Clark. I'm, like Gray said, we're so excited to be here, and thank you all for joining us. It is great that we can reach so many people out there in the virtual world, and we hope you're well and staying safe. And I am a clinician at Nonotuck, and I work out of the Berkshire area office and also the Northampton office, and a sexuality trainer. So we're very excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Cal. So just a couple of things before we jump in. This is an abridged version of our regular training, which is usually about 4 or 5 hours. So we condensed it. We made some edits, took some stuff out, and left what we thought was, most relevant to this topic. So there may be a little bit of navigating here, but we feel pretty confident that we'll be able to get through. As Deb said, that this is a very interactive training, that participants are encouraged to, speak up in. Because this is Zoom and a little bit more of an abridged version, we're going to open up the floor here and there throughout the training, but also leave some time at the end for questions and comments as well. One last thing that I do want to note is that this original training was designed specifically for people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. I know that through AFC, we support a wider population than that. So we've kind of adapted it to kind of fit all areas for people that we support. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So supporting sexuality and intimacy. We know that this is a very important topic and needed for the people that we support to be sexually healthy. And sexually healthy really means to feel good about who they are, whether it's sexual orientation, gender identity, and that they have relationships that are positive and enriching and not exploitive or abusive. And that people have enough information about sexuality to avoid any unplanned pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections, or anything of that nature. So this is a very positive approach, kind of normalizing the topic. So let's go ahead and jump in.
Okay. So when self-advocates were asked why they need and want sexuality education, this is what they said. So self-advocates say, so we can learn to have healthy relationships, so we aren't lonely, so we're able to make informed choices, so we can pick the right person, for help with the toughest part of the relationship, making it last, so we can be safe, because we all have the same desires and needs, and that's okay, so that people know their rights, so we can be sexual self-advocates, not just self-advocates. So self-advocates say it's more difficult to be sexual self-advocates than a regular self-advocate. That when asked to get a job or live on their own, those around them support them by helping them set goals and achieve those goals. But when they say they want a relationship or privacy with a partner, people get nervous and don't know what to do. In general, when someone without a disability gets older, we all assume they will start a sexual romantic relationship. We may disagree on the age, and that's okay, but we know what will happen eventually. For people with disabilities who are often thought of as asexual, they often have to advocate for themselves and tell people that they are sexual and that they have the right to privacy, sexuality education, and the opportunity to date and meet people. So sexual self-advocacy for someone with a disability is also about speaking up for their rights and not just about speaking up with a partner.
Okay, so we felt it was important to kind of start off the training with, the perspective of the people that we're supporting. The definition that Green Mountain Self-Advocates created is about speaking up for your right to have a relationship and also speaking up within a relationship. So, encompassed in that is speaking up for yourself sexually, getting information, taking a stand, saying to whomever, this is my choice. Stating your sexual limits and desires with your partner, respecting others' limits and desires, and starting to do what we want with relationships.
Okay, so our hope for this workshop is that you become more comfortable and confident addressing sexuality with people with disabilities, the people we support, and supporting self-advocates and being sexual self-advocates. So how we would do this is by focusing on these goals. So we want to gain knowledge about sexuality and specific issues for people we support, explore our own values and attitudes regarding sexuality and people we support, explore ways to communicate one-on-one about sexuality and people we support and their families and loved ones.
So many professionals, as we know, don't necessarily feel confident or comfortable or have the skills needed to address this topic, which is why we're doing this. So a lot of us tend to rely on our own values instead of effectively talking about this topic in a factual matter. We're going to talk more about values in a little bit. But here is an example of someone who does feel comfortable and confident addressing sexuality one-on-one with people that they support. So hopefully by the end of today, you kind of start feeling like you have some of these, you've learned some of these things and can kind of develop them from there. So someone has a certain level of respect. They're respectful of people no matter what their skin color is, how much money they have, what religion they believe in, who they're sexual with, their age, and what kind of disability they may have. Someone who's confident in this area has skills and is able to communicate with others in a warm and kind way and knows how to help people feel comfortable about sexuality. And that they're non-judgmental and open when talking about this topic. And that they use teachable moments and other tools to be a more effective communicator. We're going to talk about some of those tools in a little bit as well. That they have a right attitude and that they believe that everyone is a sexual being, deserves to get information about sexuality, and that it's okay to talk about this topic and ask questions. Someone who also feels confident carries a certain, level of values and understands that people have different values and beliefs and respects those differences. And lastly, that they have information and they know lots of information about sexuality and relationship and know where to get information if they don't have the answers right away. So hopefully you're feeling by the end of this like you can, relate to this a little bit. That's the goal.
Okay, so what is sexuality? Let's define it. When we hear the word sexuality, we often think that it means sex, but it means much more than that. So sexuality means more than intercourse or sex, of course. It's about intimacy, connection, and belonging. It's about relationships, both friendships and sexual. It's about how we feel about being the gender we are and our sexual orientation. It's about how we feel about others and ourselves. It's about sexual expression and behavior. It's the total of who we are, what we believe, what we feel, and how. Sorry, the chat popped up. and how we respond. And so it's a lot. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. Okay, so, and I'm not quite sure what's going on with the camera here, but hopefully we'll figure that out. So we want to mention a little bit about trauma-informed care. So, you know, this is something that we really try to focus on here at Nonotuck and make sure that we are as trauma-informed as possible. And of course, with this topic, you know, that we're talking about today, there's a lot of that can be triggered, and there's a lot that goes into sexual trauma, and it can be a really sensitive topic. So I just wanted to kind of mention this a little bit and talk about what is trauma-informed care. So according to SAMHSA, individual trauma results from the 3 E's: an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physical and or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning or physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So a trauma-informed approach incorporates the 4 R's, which is realizing the prevalence of trauma, recognizing how it affects all individuals involved with the program, organization, or system, including its workforce, resisting re-traumatization, responding by putting this knowledge into practice. And the core principles of trauma-informed systems of care are safety, ensuring physical and emotional safety, trustworthiness, maintaining appropriate boundaries, making tasks clear, choice, and I know we talk a lot about kind of choice and control, collaboration, maximizing collaboration, which is really important, and empowerment, which I think is a lot of what we're talking about here with sexuality education. So empowering skill building. And again, you know, this can be, you know, a sensitive topic and can be triggering, you know, different parts of it can be triggering for people. So we just want to make sure too that we mention it and that we, you know, everyone's taking care of themselves. And if the topic becomes difficult, you know, that everyone just takes breaks or, you know, takes good care of themselves, and that, you know, that we have some agreements along the way that obviously we're, you know, this is a non-judgmental platform and we're all being respectful. Like Grace said, you know, this is a condensed version of the training. And the larger training, we kind of discuss group agreements more. And there's a little more opportunity for interaction and kind of back and forth. But we just want to make sure that, you know, all of that is part of what we're practicing today.
Awesome. So we're going to jump into things a little bit. Let's think about some of the messages that you received about sexuality growing up. I'll back up for a second and note that everyone who signed up for this should have received an email with a lot of the handouts that we're referring to today. So feel free to look along. We're going to be addressing some of them, but those are like the full list of handouts for the full training that we do. So this is a messages handout. And we just want to think about, you know, what were some of the positive messages that you received growing up about sexuality? What were some of the negative ones as well? You know, we've gotten a range of responses back from people that, you know, they were either, you know, taught from their parents, taught from, you know, someone extended family. They learned mostly from their friends or TV. One parent could have been very involved, where the other was not at all, or, you know, vice versa. So there's a wide range of things. So it's important to think about this stuff. And we'll talk a little bit more about why moving forward. But we also want people to consider how the messages that you received or didn't receive, I mean, that's a message in itself. How did this impact your ability to talk to others about sexuality? And in contrast, we want to think about what messages do people that we support get or don't get, and how they're similar to the messages that we receive. So let's talk about that a little bit more.
Okay. So in the handouts that was sent out, there's some messages that self-advocates received. And so some of the messages that some of the self-advocates talked about, the people we may support have received, are that they're not sexual beings, they should not have sex, are innocent and childlike, and should need protection from sexuality, are not responsible, cannot solve problems, are unable to make good decisions about sexuality, always make mistakes, would not make good parents and should not have children, are different than their non-disabled siblings. So a lot of these messages are negative, right? They receive many negative messages, and these impact their sexual development and being sexually healthy. One tip that is useful is to give positive messages. So this is a way to support sexual self-advocacy. So we're going to talk about how to give positive messages.
Absolutely. And we know this isn't the case for everyone else. You know, people grow up in different circumstances, of course, but this is an overwhelming trend. Absolutely. Like there's a lot of negative stigmas and stereotypes attached to this that we want to be able to combat with positive messages. So let's talk about that a little bit. So in our extended training, which is also in person, what we have people do is we hand out sticky notes, and we have people get into groups and write down positive messages that we can use to combat some of the negative ones that people receive. So we can't do that here, obviously, but we do kind of want to open up the text chat and see what people think. So in the chat, write a positive message about sexuality that you think people you support should receive about sexuality. An example of this could be that, it's okay to have questions. Sexuality is supposed to feel good for you and your partner. Equality is important. So feel free to jump in and write in the chat, and we can check some of those out as we go. But I think it's a fun activity, and it helps us think about these things in more of a positive way and break down that stigma a bit. Okay, let's see.
Oh, Gray, so it's okay to explore.
Okay, great.
Everyone has these feelings. Let's talk about it. Sex is normal.
Yep.
Sexuality is liberating.
Great.
Yeah, they're coming in quick now.
Yeah, these are
That's
great.
great. Yeah, no, this is really, really good.
Exploring sexuality helps everyone learn about others, but maybe most of all, learn about yourself.
Very true.
It's okay to have questions. We'll find you answers. Let people know you are in control.
Yep.
Okay to love who you want to love.
Beautiful.
It's not. Don't be afraid to express yourself. Be you. You are worthy of love.
Love that.
Yeah.
Be confident. You are capable of learning how to make good decisions and to have people listen to you.
That's wonderful.
That's huge.
These are good.
Yeah, these are really, really good. Thank you guys so much. Keep writing them in. We're going to watch this after and review all this, but these are fantastic.
I'll just add the last one, Gray, with sexuality does not mean sex.
Absolutely.
I think that's something people do get confused about.
That is crucial. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you guys so much. We're going to go in just, because of time, but these are fantastic. And if more, just, feel free to jump in and write them in. Thank you. Okay. So we're jumping a little bit, Kel. We are.
Yes. Those were great. I can kind of imagine them on sticky notes on the wall. That was wonderful. Thank you guys for sharing. Yeah, so like Gray said, we're going to jump ahead a little bit, and in thinking about messages, kind of, and the messages that we get from others, and even the messages that we give to ourselves, we need to kind of stay relevant and continue to work on being inclusive in our language and our understanding about about current kind of things. So we're going to talk a little bit about sex and gender, and kind of the differences between that. So sex is the biological status as a male or female. It includes physical attributes such as sex chromosomes, gonads, sex hormones, internal reproductive organs, external genitalia. these are the same across cultures. And gender, which is different, is how we act, interact, and feel about ourselves and our sex, and it varies across cultures. So yeah, so in thinking about transgender and kind of what does this mean, and kind of, you know, getting an inclusive understanding of this, it's an umbrella term used to describe people whose gender identity and gender expression differs from that which is usually associated with their birth sex or assigned sex.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit about sex, we talked a little about gender. Now let's talk about expression and identity. And it's important that we figured, you know, to include this into the discussion because it is so relevant right now. And it's important for us to use respectful language and to be inclusive in our support of people. So gender expression, this is how we express our gender. This can be through clothing, haircut, style, our fashion, voice or body characteristics. Whereas gender identity is the person's sense of self as a male or female or other. And this is an innate sense, which is deeply psychological and is identification of, like I said, a male or female or other. And this may not necessarily match their biological sex, as Kelly was talking about.
Great. So this is a fun, cool kind of tool called the Gender Unicorn. I don't know if people have seen this. It's a really neat way to kind of represent visually and break down, you know, all these different kinds of, you know, parts of gender. So we really just want to make sure that we understand that the top three here are related to gender identity and the bottom two to sexual orientation. So you notice the gender identity, you know, the rainbow is in the head. The gender expression is all over, you know, the body in the green. The sex assigned at birth is in the genitalia, and the sexually attracted to and romantically and emotionally attracted to are in the heart. So it's just kind of a fun way, yeah, to kind of visually represent and understand it. So I'm going to include that.
These were taken from the Trans Student Educational Resources, which is a great website if you guys want to check that out for a lot of really cool charts and stuff like that. We use them throughout the training.
Yeah.
Okay. So the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation continued. Sexual orientation is who the person is erotically, romantically, and affectionately attracted to, male, female, or other. Whereas gender identity is yourself as male, female, or transgender. And one of my favorite quotes from this whole training that I like to use and you can take with you is that gender identity is who you are, whereas sexual orientation is who you do. That's a fun way of remembering that. I'll read it one more time. Gender identity is who you are, and sexual orientation is who you do.
Got to keep it fun.
Got it.
Yep. So this is another kind of interesting thing we learned in the training. I don't know if people have heard, you know, about this, the double rainbow, but autism and sexuality. So this is just out of, you know, some research that had been done. So people with autism are 7 times more likely to be gender nonconforming than the general population. When interviewed at gender clinics, 10 times more likely to have a diagnosis of autism than the general public. So they call it the double rainbow of having both autism and LGBTQIA+. So of course, autism does not guarantee asexuality, nor are people with autism's identities always heterosexual or cisgender. So it's just an interesting thing. And, you know, in thinking about autism and what we know about, you know, people with autism maybe not experiencing social cues or, you know, kind of internalizing the messages of society in the same way that maybe we do. That is just an interesting kind of thing to think about, that, you know, maybe there's some connection there. So yeah, so there's this website here that you can look at more, but we just thought it was kind of a neat little research thing.
Awesome. So here's another chart that from the Trans Student Educational Resources website. And this is very useful and a great resource for people. This kind of breaks down common gender pronouns that people use. And it's important to note that these are not the only pronouns, that there's an infinite number of pronouns as new ones emerge into our language. But it is important, if someone does not express the pronoun that they use, that you're respectful and can ask if you feel comfortable doing so, and if they feel comfortable with you asking. So like I said, this breaks it down into a pretty helpful chart. So the subjective, if someone prefers she, the objective would then be her, possessive hers, reflexive would be herself, and so forth. One that I was not aware before getting trained in this is the utilization of ze, which is, my understanding, is used most commonly to replace someone's name. So again, this is a very helpful chart. It's, like I said, it's an effort to really be inclusive and to understand this stuff, and be respectful in the language that we use. And we're going to talk a little bit more about language moving forward.
Yeah, and just thinking about that a little bit, I think, it's something that we're, I think getting used to, and people are really trying. And I think it can be hard to kind of remember those things. So, I found in teams that different teams I've worked with, that people really feel like as long as you're trying and understanding and being respectful, that if there's sometimes where you slip up and you use the wrong pronoun, that, that people understand where, as long as we're trying. So it's a work in progress. So while we're talking about being inclusive and having inclusive language, it's also important to be mindful of how we talk about people and not assume that their body parts match up with how they may identify. As we see from this slide, we may not be including everyone when we talk and teach about sexuality if we say men have penises and women have vaginas. So people are trying to use more inclusive language to describe body parts and functions. So if we think about that a little bit and look at this slide, a girl begins to menstruate during puberty. Rather than saying that, you could say a person with female sexual parts, or a person with a vagina begins to menstruate during puberty. Or instead of saying a woman usually stops ovulating when she's in her 40s or 50s, we could say ovaries stop ovulating when the person is between 40 or 50. And rather than a boy begins to produce sperm during puberty, a person with male sexual parts or a person with a penis begins to produce sperm during puberty. Or instead of a man can check his own testicles for lumps, we can say a person with testicles will need to check them for lumps. So again, this stuff takes practice, and just kind of continuing to practice using, this more inclusive language is really helpful.
Okay, awesome. So we talked a little bit about language use, and now we're going to move on and talk about barriers. We face a lot of barriers when we address this topic and we approach this topic, both with caregivers, with the people that we support, with families. And so when you think about talking about sexuality with the people you support, start thinking about what barriers specifically you face. It could be a language barrier. It could be a difference in religious or cultural beliefs. And so these are common things that happen when we're talking about sexuality and discussing this topic, and not necessarily, imposing our values on people. And so we're going to talk about how we can do that, and use a more kind of factual approach in doing so.
Okay. Like Ray said, one barrier for being able to address sexuality is managing values. So this is, in this handout 7, if you guys had gotten the handouts, there's some kind of examples there that we're going to look at. And normally in the larger training, we actually do this as an activity, but for the purpose of the virtual world here, we're not going to be able to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of read them and kind of just let you guys think about them a little bit. And what I want you to think about. So in the larger training, we have you write down kind of your gut thoughts and feelings about this, not what you think you should write. But so just kind of what are your gut thoughts and feelings as I read these, and kind of not what you think you should, but just kind of what you're thinking about them. So it's okay for a 16-year-old to have sexual intercourse. It's okay for a woman to have many partners. Is it okay for a man to have many partners? Is it okay for a person to masturbate? Is it okay if a guy won't use condoms? Is it okay for a woman to have 3 abortions? Is it okay for 2 men to be in a romantic relationship and have sex? Is it okay for 2 women to be in a romantic relationship and have sex? Is it okay when 2 people who are not in love decide to have sex? And is it okay for 2 people with disabilities to have a child? So again, we just really want to think about those questions and, you know, how given our own values, kind of how we think about them when we hear those different situations.
Okay. So as Kelly was going through the questions, you know, the majority, if not all of these, are values based and can differ from one person to the next. So think about which may have been hardest for you. Now, I know they were pretty simple questions. You know, we're not taking much background information on them necessarily. But think about how you may respond to some of them. And then we want people to think about how you would respond to them differently or the same if it was someone that you support. So again, we're kind of just, you know, we're measuring our values. We're trying to think about how we would necessarily answer them for ourselves, and then if they would differ at all and why, for the people that we support.
Right, and I noticed a chat pop up that said people should be allowed to express themselves, and exactly, I mean, that's exactly right. That's what we're talking about is, you know, our thoughts and feelings about those different questions are what Grace said, our values and the way that we express ourselves or what we think about. And really our role is to really help people to develop their own thought, you know, understand their own values about these things. So that was exactly right. So let's think about that though. What could happen if you told someone of your values, or if you shared that? Like it, you know, with the question, you shouldn't have sex until you're older. Like, you know, kind of when thinking about that, what could happen if you did share that with people? I mean, I think it normally in the larger kind of thing, we have a bigger discussion about this and people can for sure, you know, be chatting things in. But I think sometimes in our roles, we forget how much we have influence over people, how powerful our relationships are with people, and how we, you know, how we can shift their thinking. And what we want to do is help them to develop their own thinking about it, right? Or if, you know, if we're sharing those values and it may be really, really different from what they are originally thinking, or what they're, you know, what kind of feeling pops up for them, it's shame, right? And so we're not being trauma informed, and we could be creating shame where we definitely don't want to be doing that. And we want to be thinking about how can we manage our own values as they pop up, because we're human, right? And I think we're all pretty good, you know, all you know, 180 people out there in the virtual world, I'm sure are very good about managing this, but it can be really hard when these really kind of hot buttons and hot topics come up in conversations. And how can we manage them? How can we learn to kind of step back before we jump in with our answer or our thoughts and feelings? Or how can we kind of remain neutral? And we can practice, you know, practice pausing, practice a little bit of mindfulness before we react. It's really important. And the biggest thing is we want to remember is that it's not our role to teach values. It's the parents' role, regardless of what we think about how that went. It really isn't our role to jump in then and teach that.
So one way that we can kind of navigate this is to kind of find common ground and talk and be able to identify common values that we share with people if we don't necessarily see eye to eye. So these are values everyone would agree with, such as consent, respecting others, acknowledging that relationships should be equal. As we said, it's the values that we can't agree on that we can't share. For example, is it okay to have sex with someone when you are not married? Some people would say no, other people would say yes. So who gets to decide what's right? As Kelly mentioned, it is the parents' role to teach values. And it's important for parents to be able to do this. It's their job to do this. But as staff, it's not our job to teach values. Also, sometimes we worry about parents' values and want to intervene if we think the parents' values are not helpful or useful to the person. And we want to, naturally in this field, we want to be able to protect people's rights and honor people's human rights. But it's important to remember that parents and families are coming from a place of concern and fear, and that we need empathy and support and not judgment to address these things. So in a little bit, we're going to talk more about working with parents and ways to identify where they're at, and accepting their loved one as a sexual being, and how we can kind of navigate these things. But this is a good start, keeping in mind that there are common values that we can agree on.
Great. Okay. So I was just seeing some different chats come up, and we're going to move on a little bit to answering questions, but I didn't know if there was anything that we felt needed anything right now. Carrie?
No, I think we're okay for right now.
Okay. All right. So we're going to move forward and talk about, and some of this is kind of is the fun part, is tips and tools for answering questions. So we're going to review general tips and then move into answering questions. So we're going to do this by reviewing different types of questions. We'll discuss factual information questions by exploring a model for answering questions and another model for expanding our factual answers. We'll finish the section by reviewing what to do with values and opinions questions and personal questions. So we're going to do tips for discussing types of questions, and then there's a model called the teachable moments format, a Scarborough method, and then how to respond to values and opinions and personal questions, and then we'll do a little kind of virtual practice.
Okay, great. So here are some useful tips to just expand on what Kelly was saying. First off, we want to give positive messages and use inclusive language. We did some of that a little bit earlier with the combating of negative messages and practice using inclusive language. Another one is, like I said, using inclusive language. Using language such as partner or sweetheart instead of boyfriend or girlfriend. We don't want to assume heterosexuality. It's okay to not have all the answers. As workers, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to know everything about sexuality. And it's okay to not know everything. That's totally fine. It's also okay to be embarrassed. It's good to say that you feel embarrassed. It kind of levels the playing field, you know what I mean, in this discussion. It's also okay to answer later, especially in a public place. And you can kind of just save the discussion for later on. Giving giving facts and a range of opinions is also really helpful. So I mentioned in the values activity, giving facts and range of opinions and not imposing your values. It's also really important to be concrete and graphic. Thinking about whether what you're saying could be misunderstood or misinterpreted. For example, using the word excited to mean aroused, someone may take that as, being excited about an event coming up or a gift. So really being concrete and using actual language that people can understand. Also, repetition, really important to reinforce concepts used in teaching. And some things that we also do is utilizing different media and different TV shows and support and opera support groups and stuff like that. I consult with teams across the state in Nonotuck, and we've encouraged different teams to, if someone's having challenges, being able to navigate relationships or pick up on cues and flirting and stuff like that. Watching shows, with their caregiver or whoever they live with. And being able to, pause in the moment and have discussions of, do you think that this is mutual? Do you think that this advancement was wanted? Media is not always accurate portrayal of our relationships, but that's a teaching in itself. You know, a lot of people think that, you know, relationships are the way that they are on TV in real life. So being able to, like I said, utilize resources at your disposal can also be really, really helpful for people.
All right, could I just bring up a comment that someone put up? Pat mentioned that sometimes our challenge is helping adults to know that they can develop values that differ from what they were taught as a child.
Very true. That's
Right.
That's a really good point.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, really, right, like I had said before, really helping people to kind of, you know, I think our role is really helping people to develop into who they are as adults, you know, and who in their own kind of mind and thoughts and values about things. So absolutely. And these kind of conversations around sexuality, intimacy, relationships can be a really good opportunity for some of that work, and for kind of being mindful of our, you know, shared humanity, you know, and like Ray had said, times where we can, you know, feel embarrassed or not know all the answers. It's a really good time to kind of, yeah, like you said, level that playing field and just really, you know, illustrate our shared humanity. So, so in doing that, you know, here's another tip is using these 4 Ps, which was developed by Terry. I may be totally, you know, not saying the name right, Terry Cohenhoven. And she states, talking, you know, don't forget the 4 Ps, being permission to discuss, learn about sexuality and be in a relationship, privacy. Most of our responses in teaching will be, of course, involve the topic of privacy. Pleasure. Most of our, don't forget to talk about pleasure. Our culture has trouble discussing sexual pleasure, but it's important to be comfortable with this topic as well. I think that can be a tough one, but I think we have to, you know, remember that. And of course, protection. Don't forget to mention ways to protect oneself in certain situations. So now we're going to be moving into tips for answering questions.
Okay, so we're going to go through a few methods on being able to answer questions, you know, people that we work with may have for us, and how to approach those conversations. So we're going to start with actual questions and go through some of these examples as well, and then move more into values and opinions and personal questions.
Okay, so when thinking about factual questions, we're going to talk about using the teachable moments model. So we want to reassure the person that it's good to ask questions. Being positive makes you askable, and being askable is really, really important. It also gives you a few minutes to figure out how you're going to respond. So, which can be really nice, because sometimes we don't always know how to respond in the moment. So this can really help with that. So you might respond with, "That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked me that." You also want to find out what the person thinks or is really asking, which is really important, because sometimes it's not what you think it is. And you might say, "Can you guess?" or "What do you think?" "What have you heard about that?" or "Where did you hear that word?" So you want to find out where it's coming from. Do you remember the joke about the kid who comes home from school and asks his mom, "Where did I come from?" The mom goes into all the details about the sperm and the egg and all that. And the kid listens and says, "Oh, that's funny because Susie is from Rochester." So of course, so had the parent asked, "What do you think?" The child might have just said Syracuse, and the mom would have said, "That is exactly right," and would have never had to mention anything about the sperm and the egg. So we just really want to make sure where the person is, and we're understanding where it's coming from. And then you want to decide what messages you want to give. And of course, this brings us right back to the beginning of the day when we talked about giving positive messages. And we might, you know, say the messages might be, "It's okay to ask me questions." Again, being askable. "It's okay to be curious about those things." "You're fine the way you are." "It's normal for this to happen." And think about all the, you know, the positive messages that we had talked about. And then you want to answer the question simply using medical terminology and vocabulary. That's really important. We want to be short and sweet. If you go on and on, people might tune out, and so you want to try to be as matter of fact as possible. You want to encourage the person to give feedback. You could do this by saying, "Do you understand? Does this make sense? And do you have any more questions?" So you want to, you know, make sure that they're understanding what you're saying, and that you're being really clear. You ready, Gray?
All right. So our large group in-person trainings, like I said, it's very interactive. And what we ask people to do is split up into groups of 2, where one person acts as the person that's being supported, and the other person acts as the caseworker or the support person. And they practice going back and forth how we would answer this question if we asked this from someone that we support. And so we kind of go through some of the ideas and the methods that we've used up until this point. And so people are free to write into the chat how you may want to respond to this. But we thought that it was useful and relevant as well. Remember, we want to be able to use inclusive language in our responses. We want to really know what the person is asking and what experiences, responding with, well, what do you think it is? To really get to know, what their ideas are. And again, knowing what their learning skills are and learning styles are. Again, we want to be concrete as well and short and to the point. So one possible answer would be that it is when the penis gets hard and sticks away from the body. Pretty straightforward, it's inclusive, it's respectful, it's to the point, and you can kind of, work off of how they respond to that, and, express, if they have more questions, for example. But that's kind of one way, using the methods that we've learned so far to respond to this kind of question. You don't want to give information overload. You want to keep it kind of simple.
Yes. So that's one of our favorite kind of parts of the training, and during the in-person training, it's really fun to kind of see, how people handle that, and it's, it's great to practice. So I encourage you, in different settings in work or virtually, however we're able to do it these days, I encourage you to go out there and do a little role play and have fun with it. I think practice really does help us to kind of move forward in a positive way. So that was a good response in thinking about it on that level, but you may be even more effective if you include other aspects in your response. So in the example we use, the answer to the questions are physical aspects of what a boner is. What it is, another helpful tool when answering factual questions, is the Scarborough method. So that was developed by Winifred Campton, and it's a useful tool to help you include other aspects in your response, like physical, like what is it, the physical aspects, social, private, responsibility, laws, and emotional, feelings that are connected to it. So examples of what that would look like would be, social. Having an erection is something that you do in private. If you're in public, you will need to go somewhere private or figure out a way to hide it. Emotional, there's nothing wrong with erections. They are normal and healthy, but it can feel embarrassing or make others uncomfortable if you have one in public. The word boner is a nickname for the word erection. Having an erection is something that you do in private. If it happens in public, sometimes the person feels embarrassed. So it's just, like the next level of explaining it. And it actually might be what the person's looking for in this conversation. So it can be important to go to that kind of next level.
Awesome. So we're going to do a little bit more practice with the Scarborough method in defining what a condom is. So as Kelly mentioned, we can break this down into 3 different subjects: physical, social, and emotional, to really kind of paint a clear picture of what they're asking. So the physical aspect of a condom would be a rubber sock that covers the penis. The social, using a condom is private and it protects you and your partner. And emotional, people feel good when they use them because they're being responsible and don't have to worry as much, I should add. Again, if you look at all these things, these are all very inclusive. We're not defining only men as using condoms. The physical aspect is a rubber sock that covers the penis. So just keeping in mind, again, these methods and also the teachings, for language that we've used thus far.
Okay. And also there's some handouts that, we had sent around, and there's some more examples to kind of look at in there of using these methods, and you can kind of go in there, later and kind of just check it out and practice a little bit. But in moving forward to talk about, we talked about when you're asked factual questions, where you can use the teachable moments model and incorporate the Scarborough method. Now let's move on and look at other types of questions, values and opinions, like should I have sex, or what contraception should I use? And then we'll talk about personal questions. When did you start having sex, or did you have sex last night? So these are tough questions. So we're going to think about, ways that we can tackle that. So let's talk about values and opinions first. So in thinking about should I have sex, with all values and opinions questions, we want to give it right back to them. So you don't want to answer this type of question because you're only teaching facts, not values and opinions, but you can say, figuring this out for yourself. This is your question to answer, not mine. I can help you sort it out so that you can answer it for yourself. So just like popped up in the chat before, we're really trying to help people to figure these things out for themselves. Okay. So when thinking about, personal questions, like, did you have sex last night? Again, this can kind of be something that gets, can get really hard in the moment to know how to answer. So it could be that kind of time where you take a pause and kind of be mindful and thinking about the message that you want to give. And this is when you want to model that sex is a private topic and not to be shared. So you might respond by saying, that's a personal question and something that's private. So it's not something that I want to talk about. But you want to think about why they're asking it, right? And sometimes people that ask these kinds of questions, it's because they're curious about what's normal, right? They're kind of wondering about if they're normal and if what their thoughts about it are normal. So there's a range of how, so you might kind of say, there's a range of how often people have sex. Some every day, some once a week, some once a month, and some not at all. Everyone is different, and what's important to do is what makes you feel okay, not what others are doing. So again, we want to help them to kind of develop their own thoughts and feelings about it.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Cal. So we're going to just talk briefly a little bit about responding to sexual behaviors when they arise. And, this is meaning negative behaviors. And so we discussed ways to answer questions and are now moving on to how to respond to these sort of situations. And this model will help you with a number of scenarios that you experience. And so kind of the approach that we want to use is really think about why this person's doing this, find out the meaning of the behavior, and being able to comment to the person. The example that they give in the training is, let's say someone is masturbating in the lobby of your agency. And so we want to be able to find out what the meaning of the behavior is and comment to the person in a very respectful, in a very private, in a very non-shaming way. To really get an idea, of what's going on. The last thing we want to do is embarrass anyone for what they're doing. We want to think about the messages that we want to give as well. We talked a lot about, that earlier on, and the negative messages that so many people that we do support receive. So how do we again combat that, giving positive messages and being very mindful about the words that we're using and how to communicate this situation. Again, giving messages by responding simply as well is also a really good one. And then encouraging the person to really give you feedback. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about that? Is that okay? So again, in the handouts, it breaks it down a little bit more and talks a little bit about more scenarios that people can go through. But these are the main steps. We really want to be able to hypothesize, approach the situation in a respectful way, and encourage feedback. And so this is some of you may be familiar with who Dave Hinsberger is. He's a very well-known sexuality advocate for people with disabilities. If you're familiar with Open Future Learning, he's a big part of that and has a lot of really good, useful videos. And so this is these are some of the ideas that he's been able to come up with in being able to kind of come up with reasons for a negative behavior, sexual behavior. So first, is it structural? Is it something in the structure that's affecting the person, in the environment? If a person with a disability is not given the privacy that they deserve, they may do things in the wrong place, for example. So thinking about the structure of the person is really important. Modeling as well. If a caregiver is violating a consumer's boundaries, they may be doing exactly what the caregiver is doing as well. Partner selection. Is it because they have no options for partners? One of the huge roles of our job often is to be able to help people find meaningful relationships, become more involved in their communities, and have a solid network of people that they can rely on. And so, do they have that option? Is this behavior being caused by that lack of option and network? Inappropriate courtship, is it because they have not been taught how to flirt with someone? It could be as simple as that. It could be sexual knowledge. Where did they learn about sexuality? What do they know about sexuality? And again, thinking about, some of the commonalities when it comes to thinking about the lack of information people may receive, growing up. Not only people, who have disabilities, people who don't have disabilities as well. Again, learning history. Is it because of what they learned growing up? Perpetual arousal, is it because they don't complete? That could be another reason as well. Medical, could it have something to do with an infection or a medical problem that they're experiencing? Medication, this is also, this can be common too. Is it because of a change in medication, or is it certain medication causing this? Moral vacuum, is it because no one has told them, is it okay? So again, it kind of goes back to that education aspect of things. And then the last one that Kelly and I really wanted to add is whether or not it's trauma-based. We see these things kind of resurface in ways that we can kind of tie back to something that may have happened previously. And so these are 11 different approaches and ideas that people can consider when trying to hypothesize and trying to approach these kind of situations, inappropriate sexual behaviors.
Yeah, thanks, Gray. I think it's really important just to kind of reiterate this, that we really do this, that we really think this through and explore this a little bit, because we want to really understand what's happening with the person and where things are coming from. And because I think sometimes we can respond too quickly and because something's triggered within us, and it's a really difficult thing to respond to. So I think we can, have responses that can be shaming, or that can, create a lot of self-doubt, or a lot of negative reinforce a lot of negative self-images for people. And I think we just want to really be careful and, utilize your teams. That's why we have multidisciplinary teams. And I think it's really important, like being part of Trauma Informed, to collaborate and, to reach out to clinicians, to nurses, to, people on the team that might understand us a little bit and brainstorm kind of what's going on before responding in a way, that isn't going to be helpful. So I think that's just really important. And of course, in the longer training, we address this, much more. And in the handouts, you can read more different scenarios to think it through a little bit more. But we want to move on to our last section, which is really important because I think a lot of us struggle with this, which is working with families and loved ones. So there may be many reasons why it's difficult for providers to work with parents and caregivers and loved ones. Many parents don't agree that it's a topic that needs discussion. Providers may disagree with the parents' values, and that's hard sometimes to know how to handle. Providers might disagree with their approach, and it might be fear-based, negative messages versus promoting sexually healthy and positive messages. But we need to find ways, like Gray said in the beginning, we need to find ways to be supportive to parents and work with them in partnership. And thinking about, a systems approach, we really need to be thinking about, this is the families are a part of this person's system, and we really need to, support and promote relationships. And everyone kind of collaborating together. So so we're going to use, in thinking about it a little bit, we're going to use the behavior change model, which is also called motivational interviewing, which is done a lot in the addictions and substance use world. And we can use this when thinking about kind of anything, but and working with parents. So it can also be used when assessing how ready agencies are in accepting people with disabilities as sexual. So this model was created by James Prochaska and Carlos Di Clemente, and they explored the stages of people go through when quitting smoking. I think that's kind of how it started. So here's the different stages we want to think about when we're thinking about how ready parents or caregivers are to kind of accept that they need to be addressing this. So the first stage is pre-contemplation, which is no way. This stage is where people are in when they are not even considering making a change. And this would be a parent who is in denial or refuses to discuss the topic. And with this person, you want to listen to them and find out why they feel the way that they do, but also want to help them see the value in talking about it. Many parents don't realize that ignorance is not bliss, and that sexuality education is actually sexual abuse prevention. It's really important to remember. So the next stage is contemplation, which is maybe. And this is a group of parents who they know that they need to discuss the topic, but are unsure about how to go about doing it. They may be more open to receiving newsletters or more information and letting their child watch videos on masturbation. This group needs tools and support. And then there's the preparation, which is yes, very soon. And they're planning to tackle this issue very soon. They're kind of getting ready. They may need some more content support and guidance, but they're ready and getting prepared. And then there's the action stage. This group talks about sexuality openly and in a positive way and are trying out this new behavior. And they can have lots of energy and motivation and kind of enthusiasm during this stage. And then there's the maintenance stage, which is kind of keep it going. And they may have been doing this for over 6 months, and they may even be able to start helping other parents or caregivers to start talking about this and serve as peer educators for other parents. So we want to use this model to figure out where parents are accepting their child as a sexual being and how you might intervene. It's difficult for any parent to think of their child as a sexual person, but especially for parents of young and grown children with disabilities. Many parents worry that their son or daughter will be victimized. And since the rates are very high for people with disabilities, that's a legitimate concern. I mean, I think a lot of this is out of fear, and we really need to remember that. So this section is going to help us to find ways to work with parents and help the person that we support in a positive way.
I had to unmute myself. Thanks, Cal. So looking at this list, we encourage people to think about, what things you're good at in terms of, working with parents and which ones you need to work on. So 2 key elements in a relationship is trust and respect. And both of those elements take time. And so working with parents is not a quick fix, as we know. Kelly and I both worked with many parents who describe themselves, who staff describe them in negative ways. But I think it's important to have the skills to empathize with parents and to really understand where they're coming from, because being empathetic shows respect for the parents and really builds trust in that relationship. So one tip is it's really important to remember that many of us were raised in a culture that may not view sexuality in a positive way. So it's our job to be able to help parents think about sexuality in a positive way and to think about the messages that they're giving their adult children about sexuality as well. Another tip that is useful is listening, really listening to what parents have to say. And this will really help you empathize with them. Specifically finding out what worries them about their adult child and sexuality. Many times when we listen, we hear myths from parents that we can dispel. Like, if I talk about it, they'll go out and do it. And as Kelly mentioned, ignorance is not bliss, and knowledge is power in this sense.
Okay. So, you know, another tip is we want to dispel any myths that the parents might have about sexuality education. Here are some myths that parents may have. Um, Many parents think of their child as still a child, and even though they may be an adult, they often say, you know, he doesn't need this information because he has a cognitive age of 5. What you can say is that their body is changing or has changed, just like everyone else's, and that they will need the same information that anyone needs without disabilities. If your son or daughter is 21, he or she needs what any 21-year-old needs. The topics to cover are based on the biological age of the child, not the cognitive age. The only difference is how you teach the topic, not what topics you teach. You also, some parents also worry that if you talk, you know, like we've said, if you talk to them about sexuality, it will cause them to become interested and possibly become sexually active. You can tell parents that studies show that people who receive comprehensive, medically accurate sexuality education are actually more likely to wait to have sexual intercourse. And if they do decide to have intercourse, that they're more likely to use protection. Talking about sexuality doesn't make them become sexual, it informs them and protects them. Another issue that can arise is the idea that you will be teaching my child how to have sex. You can tell the parent that the class, you know, that you can cover many topics, including public and private places, behaviors and conversations. You can talk about relationship issues like healthy or unhealthy relationships, how to become friends, and what to do if you're in unhealthy relationships. You know, you can also talk about general skills like communication and decision making. So one issue that parents bring up is that you'll be teaching my child values, and what if they aren't the same values as my values? Again, you will not be teaching values. You can talk about values, general values like respect, responsibility, and consent. And you can give them information and have them reflect, of course, like we've talked about, on their own values.
Keep forgetting to unmute myself. This is our last little activity that we're going to be doing, and it goes back to what we started talking about at the beginning of this module, which is the motivational interviewing. So I'm gonna give some scenarios, and we're gonna think about what stage they may be in for accepting their adult child as a sexual being. Okay, so the first scenario, a parent approaches you in the hall and says, "How dare you teach my son about sex?" And the son is 29 years old. So let's think about what stage they may be in for talking about sexuality and accepting their adult child as a sexual being. We would say that this parent would be in pre-contemplation for accepting their child's sexuality. So one way that we can respond in this scenario, you know, the parent is very upset. So listening and reflecting back on what you hear is really, really important. You may want to say something like, you know, you sound really upset. Can you tell me what concerns you about my conversation with your son? Again, our inclination may be to defend the person's rights to sexuality education and information, but we really need to take a step back in this setting and be empathetic and listening, which will help kind of de-escalate the conversation. So some other questions that we may want to respond with is, what worries you about your son having sexual information? I would imagine, you know, that they believe that talking about this gives them ideas that he didn't have before. And you can mention that sexuality education helps people to be safe and understand healthy relationships as well. So again, knowledge is power in this sense. So for someone who's, like I said, who's responding to you with, "How dare you teach my son about sex?" You know, we find them in the pre-contemplation stage. And these are some of the methods that we can use to kind of respond. Okay. Next scenario. A parent tells you that they disapprove of their 20-year-old child masturbating. Let's think about what stage they would be in, this parent would be in for talking about sexuality and accepting their child as a sexual being. Seems like, again, the person is in pre-contemplation for accepting their child's sexuality. Both this scenario and the last one are a little bit difficult, especially if you aren't a parent yourself. Many parents find it difficult to listen to someone who may not have ever been there or can't necessarily put themselves in their shoes. And so both these scenarios may benefit from another parent of a child with a disability talking with them. And there are many parents out there who wish they had handled things differently and might be willing to share that with another parent. So if you have a good relationship with this parent, you could share some information about sexual development, and that it is normal and natural for people to masturbate. Hold on one second. I think one thing to note is that, we can and often butt heads with parents. And sometimes we just don't see eye to eye. And sometimes it's not worth pushing the topic if it means that you're going to dampen this relationship, especially if it's going to be a long-lasting relationship with someone. So sometimes you just have to let things go, and hoping that the information that you give them and the approach that you use can kind of change their mind over time. But it's, like I said, sometimes it's not worth ruining a relationship over. Okay, last scenario. A parent comes to you and tells you that her son said he's in love with a man, and the parent is very upset. So if we think about the motivational interviewing model, again, what stage do we think that this person might be in for talking about sexuality and accepting their child as a sexual being? This one's a little bit tricky because it's hard to tell if they are accepting and just shocked and upset, or if they're not accepting at all. So let's say they're accepting but surprised, shocked and worried what it means for their son to be gay. Then we may want to put them into the contemplation or even the preparation stage with lots of emotion. So let's think about how we could respond to that. First of all, most important is listening, really listening to what they have to say, and then asking non-judgmental questions. You can say something like, "You seem really upset. Can you tell me why you're upset?" And then really listen to why, what they have to say. You can also acknowledge that although this is difficult, it shows that your son feels close to you and comfortable sharing this with you, and demonstrates the kind of relationship that you have with your son. One of the stories that Catherine McLaughlin, who is part of Elevatus training and trained us in this so we can train you, told us a story about someone who, similar instance, the parents were not accepting. They had very specific cultural backgrounds and religious views, and was not accepting of their son being interested in other men. And so, they went through this discussion, they used this approach and everything, and then her son just basically said, "I want to be loved and I want to love." And that was the flip of the switch that really, that changed things for her. We know that, this is working with parents, as I said, is not a quick fix, and it's going to take time. It's going to entail building rapport and trust and empathy. But it can be done. It can be done, and hopefully you can use some of these methods that we've talked about today in doing so. And that's our training. We went a little bit over time, but we hope you guys enjoyed it. I don't know if we have time to open the chat to questions or open the floor to questions. I guess that's up to Carrie and Deb, but we really appreciate you guys being here.
Yes, thank you all so much. And yes, sorry we went over. We had to work hard to condense it. So much information. So hopefully we have a little bit of time, because there's a few things in the chat that I wanted to speak to. I don't know if we have time.
Yeah, Kelly and Gray, we can keep the chat open for a little while now. We do thank you both very much. What a great webinar presentation for today. Just a couple of quick notes for participants today. We did have a few people who registered after the start time. So we will be sending off the materials again in the email later this afternoon with the evaluation for the nursing contact hours. Again, for anybody interested in the contact hours, please sign into the chat as proof of attendance. And again, return that evaluation. It's good feedback for the presenters, but also for the nursing contact hours. And we'll keep the chat open for another couple of minutes.
Okay. I just wanted to address something that I saw come through from Claire, Claire Kuhn. It was great because, you know, what we talked about with working with parents is a lot of times when parents come to us, it's in a really emotional kind of state, and they're in that really big, you know, pre-contemplation and denial. And I think it's really hard and it's really challenging to address that. So I think the real validation, the genuine listening, the really understanding where they're coming from, can really be helpful in de-escalating that and assuring them that, you know, we're going to really help understand where things are coming from. Like she mentioned that maybe, you know, if someone's masturbating in public, the parents can have this big reaction. And, you know, just to, you know, really assure them that there's a multidisciplinary team that's really working, you know, with their child to understand what's happening, and just, you know, help them to kind of feel safer with it. And then, yeah, maybe a risk meeting is what she said. So that was just funny.
So Kelly and Grace, I just wanted to check and see, are you guys going to be sharing the PowerPoint presentation?
I can send it over to you if you want to send it out to people.
I think that would be helpful. There's a lot of information on those slides, and you guys did a fantastic job reviewing it all. But I know I can't remember it all.
Yeah,
no, absolutely. I'll send it over to you right now, and you can.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If there's anything else.
We were very happy that they're going to get the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Good.
Great comments. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
All just getting used to this. Yeah, thanks, Claire. I think you're right. I mean, I think this is a great training for direct care staff for sure, and an ongoing kind of development, you know, process. Absolutely.
Thank you guys so much. This has been amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks,
We're all
Karina.
getting used to this virtual world and how to navigate it, and it was great
Yes.
to get the information out.
Kelly and Gray, next time you guys do a full training, will you let me know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. That was really informative.
No, I'm so glad.
Yeah, and the full one is really is great too. There's a lot more information.
Yep.